Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all having a very good GDC this year, and thank you for coming. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about co-op design for open world games. I'm David Bowering. I was one of the principal gameplay designers and systems designers for Saints Row 2. I'm from Volition, Inc. We're a little studio in the middle of Illinois and Champaign, and we like to take on a lot of technical challenges and present them to our players. Red Faction Guerrilla gave real-time destruction to everyone. For Saints Row 2, we wanted to do something equally as impressive or fun for the players anyways, and that was co-op in an open world setting. What I'm going to talk about today is primarily the most information I got from doing Saints Row 2. So like a lot of the stuff I'm going to present is very specific to Saints Row 2, but also specific to open world games in general. So it should give you guys a lot of good information if you're endeavoring to do open world game or a co-op game. I'm going to cover a lot of topics in this speech. Some of it's going to be pretty high level. I'm going to delve into some lower level stuff. But a lot of it's going to be high level because there's a whole lot of stuff to talk about. For our vision for Saints Row 2 for co-op, we had some high level things that set a big challenge for us. The first thing was we wanted the players not to be tethered. We didn't want to have any limitations on the distance the players could travel from each other. We wanted the players to be able to go and explore the world and be able to experience the emergent gameplay that is the hallmark of open world games. The second big important thing is allowing the players to drop in and out of the session at any time. We didn't want to place any artificial limitations on when the player could join. And of course, we also wanted players to feel like they were earning something for playing with their friend. A lot of games, you don't earn a whole lot, but we have kind of a complex system for doing that. I'll talk about it later. But we thought it was very important to allow players to earn rewards. And the last big piece is the players should be really cooperative in their play. They should feel like they're in the game together, reaching the same goals, and getting rewards for each other. I'm going to be talking about connected over Xbox Live or Direct Connect. We couldn't do split screen, mostly because of rendering concerns, and we would have had to actually have a different rule set. The non-tethered wouldn't work because of our eventual hardware solution we had to do. So that's just an interesting tidbit. I'm going to play a little video for you guys. It's one of actually our marketing videos that we came out with prior to launch, but it really captures like the essence of what we wanted to do for co-op in Saints Row 2. So I'll just let you see it.
This election season, it's time to lay aside our petty differences and band together as teams for the greater good of society. Republicans and Democrats. Rednecks and tree huggers. Cops and robbers. Pirates and ninjas. Work together to spring your crews from the pen and come on down to Saints Row for some team-building cooperative gameplay. Bond with old friends in online gaming harmony with full drop-in, drop-out online co-op support and play through the entire single-player campaign with your cohorts. On October 14th, it's time to form a coalition of the willing to take co-op gameplay to all new heights. Saints Row 2.
Thanks for indulging me. I really like that trailer. So we had a few strategies to when we're approaching this. Like open worlds are super complex. Any of you that have worked on them know that there's a lot of systems that go into actually making the gameplay and the world compelling. Now, when you remove the tether from the player, it creates a whole lot of complexity for programmers, which they really actually gleefully went on and really tackled well. But the thing that removing the tether for the player did for us was made the emergent gameplay possibilities for co-op exponentially greater, and that afforded the players experiences that, as designers, we had never could foresee. And I was extremely pleased with some of the stuff that players will be able to do. Like I said, emergent gameplay is key to open world games, and supporting that in any co-op implementation, I think, is very important. But the other important aspect, of course, is modal gameplay, what I describe as missions and activities. What we were really going for within the mission and activity framework were letting the players do anything they could do in single player, which is a huge, huge thing to do. And another thing is not making systems that got in the way of the players' enjoyment of those systems. Not putting undue interfaces or weird mechanics always in the place. We really wanted to focus on just making it a natural, seamless thing, and they could encourage the players to play together and cooperatively. Now, like I said, the two main modal gameplay opportunities we gave to the players were activities and missions. Activities in Saints Row 2 were more focused on one-off special mechanics, kind of pushing the regular mechanics into like a wackier, crazier, adding extra physics, adding extra layers of mechanics over the top of our already existing mechanics to push them into a singular experience. Missions, on the other hand, were more story-driven, focused on our core gameplay, and were focused on, like I said, giving the player rewards, progressing the story of the game. Now, like I said, we didn't want to tether the players, but we also didn't want to put the onus on the players to have to get together at the beginning of every time they started a modal gameplay session. In Saints Row 2, you had to go to a trigger, and the trigger's in the world, and then the player was prompted, like, would you like to start this mission? In single player, that's fine, right, because they're right there. In multiplayer or co-op, right, the other player could be across the world. So what do? Do you teleport the players? Do you let them drive across the world and then start it? Our decision was to let the players, basically, both players get an acknowledgement that you're starting this multiplayer mode or this co-op mode, and they could choose to start it. And once they chose to start it, after that acknowledgement, they were teleported together at the very beginning. This is just a small video to show you like how that worked. So as you can see, one player walks up to the trigger and activates it, and the second player gets a prompt. I'll just play that really quickly again since it's such a short video. So the other players just engage in whatever they're doing, and then we teleport them together. Like in that very simple scenario, you see a number of systems actually in action. The driving systems, the non-tethered systems, and also we had to decide, like, what are we going to do for players? One player's in the car, the other player's just on foot. For technical reasons, we had to actually take the car away from one player. So just as a tidbit. So going to missions for open world games, for Saints Row 2, and specifically, we had three real main methodologies of approaching those missions. The first one being physically separate, but parallel goals, where the players basically would separate for a small amount of time, complete separate goals that were integral to the mission's success, then come back together and continue the mission again. Another mechanic was basically very specific co-op mechanics like rail shooters, or actually giving the players very specific things that they would do together. The third one was, and I think this is the strongest one, but is often not considered a real co-op mechanic, but just allowing the players to go through the mission the same way they would in the single player mode, But however, since we have the systems to support the players kind of exploring the possibilities of what they could do, like getting different types of vehicles or approaching the mission in different ways, they were able to come up with solutions to the problems that we presented them in very interesting ways, and I'll get into that very quickly here. The first one I'm going to talk about is the physically separate goals. Now, when you are doing mission design for an open world game, there's always this kind of debate, at least we debated a lot, about how much to direct the player. In co-op, that becomes a double problem, right? How are you going to direct each player to do exactly what you want them to do at the exact same time? Really, you can't do that, right? So what we do is, in this particular scenario, each player is given a separate goal, and each player has to complete that goal to continue the mission. And here's a little video, and I'm going to talk over the video a little bit. In this mission, each one player has to rescue an AI player from the hospital who's been shot, while the other player secures a helicopter and meets the other player down below with the helicopter. So, as you can see at the very beginning, like both players they start at the same point. The co-op player can help the player that's kind of given a disadvantage because they're in the special mechanic where they have to push the gurney down the hallway. But as you can see, like very quickly, through the direction of the help text messages, we direct the players in separate ways to complete their own goals. Now, I cut this video so we wouldn't have to go through the whole thing. But as you can see, also, it's interesting to note the help text message, the tutorial message. We decided also to pause the game while the tutorial messages were up for both players. Simply because we didn't want one player to be paused while the other player was still live. It created a lot of synchronization issues on the technical side that we didn't want to deal with. So, as you can see, the players got together at the end, got in the helicopter, and there's a whole other section of that mission actually where the players are together shooting out the helicopter and just like, the crazy kind of stuff that happens in Saints Row 2. The second mission I want to talk about here is both players are locked together. We had a number of gameplay modes where players were locked together doing very specific mechanics. And there's not a whole lot special about this, I would say. I mean, it is an interesting mission, but it's a rail shooter, right? There's a number of things you're going to notice in this video that's coming up. The players are both in a helicopter. They're both shooting out of the window. But just a few notes on like what we had to do for this. We had to make a box helicopter. It's like just the interior of the helicopter. It's enlarged, right? So we can accommodate the cameras for both players. And this is important to think about when you're approaching anything, not just the interior of a vehicle, but the interiors in general and the environment. But let's move on to this video so you can see what I'm talking about. So as you can see, both players are locked together. Both players have independent camera motion, so they can see entirely different views of the scene. There's not a whole lot of action going on as far as like the AI and like other actors on the screen, but there is a lot of effects. And in this particular mission, as the players blow up more of these farm machinery and chemical tanks and stuff, we actually start catching the field on fire as well. So all you tech guys out there are probably wringing your hands and going, oh my God, how are we going to sync this stuff?
They're not going to get very far.
I'll talk later about how you're going to do that. But yeah, this is a very specific mechanic. It seemed to be very successful. Oh, sorry. The last part I'm going to talk about is the no significant outward change. And like I said, this is my favorite type of co-op mission because it affords the players the most freedom to actually choose their path of success. Now, I love the world, the possibility fields. I love that. I cribbed that from Will Wright. But increasing the possibility fields for the player is dangerous, right? Because you can always, the more things the player can do, the more possibilities that they're going to break the game for you, and that's going to cause you a lot of extra QA time, extra design time, extra iteration time. So you need to think about that. But in the end, it's very successful. The players really enjoy it. Now here, you can see the players, like at the beginning of the mission, basically have decided one player is going to get in a car while the other player is going to be in an attack helicopter. Now, we didn't plan this mission this way, and this video is actually from a usability test that we did. So, as you can see, the players just kind of figured out, hey, I can do this, and I'm gonna beat you designers by coming up with a new solution for this problem. This actual video, or this mission, is a later mission in an arc against one of our enemy gangs, where the players have to attack an enemy base. Now, as you can see, there's a whole lot of systems working here in this as well, and it's very seamless. Now, I can't speak for the ability of both players, but I thought it was really cool. I really enjoyed this video because it really speaks to me about what we tried to accomplish as far as no tethering and allowing the players basically the freedom to do whatever they would like. I'm going to go ahead and go past this video. Now, also, I'd like to mention, like, each player has to succeed to get through the mission. So that allows some extra incentive to both players. Now, like I said earlier, activities in Saints Row 2 were kind of extensions of our normal gameplay that allowed for each player to basically experience a very singular event that had what I want to say, basically, like in this particular activity I'm going to talk about next, it's called insurance fraud. And the players basically throw themselves in front of vehicles to get insurance money. And it's kind of a gag on Havoc physics and letting the players just have silly fun. We had two actual basic approaches to balancing and providing these activities for the player. One was just providing a threshold score with a time limit, basically balanced through increasing the threshold for success. The second was very specific mechanics. Each player had to succeed, and each player had a very specific set of mechanics that they had to succeed in to actually succeed through the mission or through the activity. The first one I'm going to talk about is the threshold score. It's called insurance fraud, and like I said, players will throw themselves in front of vehicles to get more money. And again, as you can notice, like the players have decided that this is a good way to game the system. They went and got an attack helicopter again, and are going to throw themselves out of the attack helicopter in the bonus zone for this activity. So again, we as designers allowed the players to beat us in a very funny and interesting way for them. But I mean, this is honestly one of the more popular activities in Saints Row 2, and it's a very simple one in implementation. But as you can see, you don't always have to come up with something very unique for co-op gameplay. just allowing the players to do what your systems have been designed to do can provide for a very compelling experience. All right. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that. The second activity I'm going to talk about is escort, and I apologize. It has some kind of racy, sexual themes in it, so if you're offended by that, I'm sorry. But it's a very good example of giving each player a very specific role with very specific co-op mechanics, and each player has to succeed in their goal for the activity to succeed. It's not each player's together in this, but they are actually doing separate things. So you'll see the video, and again, this is a mature game. So this activity actually is about prostitution. One player's the pimp, the other one's the prostitute, and what I thought was interesting about this is in Saints Row 2 we let the player play male or female, right? So in design meetings we're like, well, what do we do? Like, do we always provide a female? Do we always provide a male John? Do we always, are we going to tackle these tough issues? Or like, no, just always make it an opposite sex person. So that's just the kind of interesting things you'll come up with in design meetings if you're working on a game with this content. But as you can see, like the top player has a very specific mechanic that they have to go through and succeed in, while the player at the bottom actually has to successfully drive and evade the cops or the press, depending on the level. The top, what we lovingly call the top mechanic, the sexy time mini game.
That was your fault.
But it's a very good example of just of using separate mechanics for the players. It's not my personal favorite. I actually like just using systems in a very interesting way.
I got distracted.
But I think it's also a very compelling mechanic as well. And I would have liked to. I wish we had recorded some of the chatter for the usability test over Xbox Live, because you get some pretty interesting stuff for this, and it's funny. And players just have a good time doing it.
It's you.
I haven't had a blowjob since I got married. No, CBT.
Well, thanks for bearing with that. So, like I said, this is super risky. Why is it risky? Adding co-op into your game adds a lot of complexity on the technical side. And also that complexity can translate into game stability not being very good. And as you all know, to make game mechanics very good, you have to iterate a lot. And so one of the things we weren't able to do, and especially on activities, was iterate a lot until the final months of the project. And basically we kind of slept at the office for a while because that's the chance we got, and we wanted to make it good, but I'm just kidding. We didn't sleep at the office. We got to go home. So I know my design directors out there going, no, we didn't sleep at the office. So another system that you're going to need to think about is just the vehicle camera. One of the things that we wanted to do, and one of the notable features of Saints Row 2 is as players can shoot out the window when they're driving a car. Now, that's a very simple system, and it seems like, well, this is going to be a no-brainer, right? But it had a lot of implications on animation because we didn't provide player animations for all weapons. So if you're thinking about letting the second player go through every weapon out the window, you're going to need to provide animation space and animation planning time for that. Also, the camera is going to have to be tuned and positioned for each vehicle, or however your system works, to allow for both players to have a very good view. Some of you may have played some other games that don't have a very good co-op camera, and it becomes frustrating for the player. Another thing to consider in your mission design and scripting is the placement of triggers. In Saints Row 2 especially, we allowed multiple approaches to different buildings. Like, for instance, this building has the walkways over there that actually have windows in them that allow for the players to break through. It also has a front door here. And so you have the possible entrances are there or at the front door and through this atrium. What we found players often doing was not using the front door, but flying through using a helicopter or an airplane, parachuting down, breaking through there while the other player attacks through the front. So just plan for some extra complexity in your trigger placement and scripting if you're going to allow them to attack a problem without a tether, without limits in their actual location. Also spawning, as you might guess, like when you are spawning enemies in a single player scenario, you don't really have to worry as much about the camera, right? Because they're only looking one direction. But when you have two players, you got twice the camera. And a lot of times we would find that players would get in situations where they could actually see the spawning happen. So we had a couple of things that we did to mitigate that. One was we just had a function that would hold spawning until the cameras were pointed away. Now that was fine for a little while, but also provided the problem of, well, players would march past a certain point and then the enemies would spawn and surprise the players, which players don't like to be surprised a lot in that way. So also another thing is if your memory can allow it, if you can manage for it, try to spawn enemies early. Try to plan your resources so you can spawn through a level in a very logical way and get that out of the way before the players arrive. We had a couple of different approaches to balancing. The first two, obviously, decrease the player's hit points, decrease the player's weapon damage, thus making the enemies tougher. We also wanted to explore increasing the numbers of enemies, but very early on our technology did not actually allow for that. And I'll talk a little bit later about this, but later our technology allowed for that, so we actually added that in at some point. We were really pushing hard on our features for Saints Row 2. We wanted to get as much content as possible. And we just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed more features into the game. Any of you who played Saints Row 2 probably know there's an immense amount of gameplay in there. Just take my word for it. Please evaluate that stuff quickly, very carefully. More features means more complexity, more bugs, and it's not necessarily going to make your product more competitive. And in fact, we have a lot of usability research that says that most players don't play through, and as you know, most players don't play through entire games. So I just wanted to put that as a friendly word of advice. And again, we didn't cut much of anything. In fact, we were pushing new content in the game up to the very end. So one of the things that I talked about earlier was our drop-in and drop-out co-op. Now, it presents very seamlessly to the player, but it's actually a kind of complex system in implementation. So the players can join each other at any point in progression. So if a player is ahead in the mission, very far ahead in one arc, and another one is at the beginning, they can still join. Like I said, we want players to always earn rewards for what they were doing. So we also wanted the players to be able to earn achievements and all that other trophies and everything else. So this is kind of a little scenario I put together to kind of explain that system. So if one player, the client player, has completed the first 2 missions of an 8-mission set, right? And then the server has completed the first 6 missions. The players get together, right? Complete the last 2 missions of the set. and everybody is happy. They get their mission completion, rewards, everything, right? Then they go on their separate ways. They're like, I'm done. I got to go. The server basically goes on like nothing ever happened because they're always the master of progression, right? Whenever somebody joins them, their progression is the master. The server gets their achievements. They just continue on like nothing ever happened. For the clients, a lot more complicated, right? Like I said, they didn't have the missions. Oh my God, the missions in the middle done, and so they complete the missions in the middle there. Then when they get to the last mission, they are prompted, do you want to play this, or do you want to play see the cutscene? Once they go through those two, then they get their achievement and they move on. Some of you may think, oh, that's pretty damn complex. Why'd you guys do that? Basically, that was the key to allowing players to get progression, get rewards, and still drop in and drop out any time. The more you limit the player's progression, or when they could join in the progression of the game, the more that limits the possible times a player can actually join a session. So, take my word for it, do not limit, depends on your game obviously, but the more you limit the player, when the players can join, the less times you're going to have people play your co-op mode. So you don't want to put all your work into this and not have people play your game or play your co-op mode. So this is a problem you'll probably have to spend a lot of thinking about, especially if you want to keep story continuity intact. Why do it, huh? It's a lot of hassle. It's a lot of pain and suffering sometimes, but it's also very gratifying. Research has shown, obviously players are connected these days, right? That's the theme of this year's GDC is social gaming, getting people together. So as you can see, about 40% of all Xbox 360 players have a Xbox Live Gold account. It's even higher for PS3 users. Providing social content for your players is very important if you want to stay relevant. People want connected gaming experiences. They want to be able to reach out to their friends and play together. Especially for Saints Row 2, where we have such a strong customization element. There's a huge amount of stuff out on the internet, just people making characters and putting different scenarios together. And of course, the other things, you increase your product shelf life, and it's just an expectation these days that you're going to provide online content of some sort. The last part I'm going to get into is just some very specific stuff about some of the systems that we had to supply to the player to get it to work. It's going to go into some technical stuff on the servers as well. So like I said, drop in and drop out. It's kind of complicated. But it's also a key part, I think, of providing a co-op to your players. These are the join screens for Saints Row 2. As you can see, it's fairly straightforward. We've provided a couple different options, the System Link and the Xbox Live. And one thing I would like to note about this slide is with our quick match, you need to think about how your engineers are approaching the quick match, because we actually had to sort through all of the multiplayer matches that were going on as well as co-op sessions that were being requested. And it caused a lot of problems for our players actually being able to connect to random people on the internet to play with. And that's frustrating. We want to remove frustrating parts from our players. Also, it's just fairly standard stuff, right? One of the things that we did not handle well, and if you provide cheats for your game and after those cheats are enabled, you turn off achievements, make sure the players are aware that they're joining someone that has a cheat enabled. We've had more complaints, and we've actually thought about addressing it in a patch about people joining games and then having their save games disabled or their achievements disabled because they saved not knowing that they had joined a cheater. So just keep that in mind. Another thing I'm talking about is the story. Like, when you have story, sometimes it's going to take a backseat into, or the story's going to take a hit in continuity if you're going to allow the drop in, drop out. One of the things we had to do also was allow each player to be star of their own cutscene. I'm going to show you a small cutscene right now. But
Nice place you got here, Shanti.
What are you doing here?
I've been watching this place. I know you're here alone.
Not for long, I'm not. So you better get the...
Don't make this difficult. Bitch! Back off! Back the fuck off! You think you walking out of here? Unless you want a bullet in this bitch. You're goddamn right I am. Kid, you just made us. You know who I am? Seeing as I'm gonna kill you in a few seconds, I don't really give a shit. Keep your distance!
So there you can see, like, basically the implementation of our cutscene system for co-op. Now, obviously, if you're going to feature both characters in one cutscene, you're going to have to plan up front what the role of each player is going to be. And I don't know if you, I just want to quickly mention the difference in sets. There were some lighting differences. You couldn't see all the differences, but in Saints Row 2, the progression of the game controlled that set. Like, as the player progressed later through the game, the actual set changed to a more fancy and upscale club. So, but for us, we had to, it was easier, basically, to make each player the star of their own cutscene. Like I said, if you're going to plan for players to be in each cutscene, you're going to need to basically find a role for each one, and I suggest, like, a stand-in, basically. I know that other games have said, like, we're not going to do co-op because we can't find a cohesive story experience for those two players, and that is hard to do. So, like I said, be flexible. Don't go into it and think you're going to push and push and push, unless you're very, very careful up front about the engineering part of it. I know how many times we were stopped in our iteration cycle because of stability problems. But actually, some things were a pain in the butt to actually get working. Notoriety system was one of those systems that actually was a lot of hassle to get to work. Notoriety, if you guys aren't familiar, basically the players attack each faction and get a response from the AI live. So what we had to do that was basically pick a pony. One player, whoever attacked first, both players got notoriety from that faction. And the reason for that is we just couldn't spawn that many AI. And we were never able really to solve that problem to give a compelling AI response and consistent AI response to both players simultaneously from many different factions. We already had to support police and gangs simultaneously, so that would have added a third faction. Now, you may be able to do that if you limit the complexity of the factions that are responding to your notoriety system, but for us, we had to make a very, very clear distinction and make a sacrifice. We had another thing actually that worked very seamlessly. It was our diversion HUD. Basically, that diversion HUD is the stars in the upper right-hand corner and allowed the players to be rewarded for anything they did within the session. Since that system was focused solely on what players did specifically, each player individually, it worked very naturally, actually. So surprisingly, we really didn't have to do any kind of iteration on that or very specific design to get that to work. this is a little bit of tech stuff on the server. Our technical underpinnings came out of Saints Row 1, the multiplayer code, and we had a very distinctive client-server relationship. It was very traditional for multiplayer games. One machine's a server, all the other clients join it. So here's a little illustration I made. So we have the server. He controls all AI processing, scripting, everything, and reports it to the client. The client then reports all other actions that the client has taken back to the server, and then the server reports the update back to it. As you can see, that may cause some problems. So, again, I'm saying be warned. Be flexible. Be ready to cut features. One of the things that we came up against because of the client-server relationship, as more and more players got into the world, the complexity increased, right? Or more and more of the systems that we implemented came online. The complexity of what the server had to relay to the client became increasingly complex, and the data packets became huge. The client started to suffer. The client started to get out of sync. The client started being unable to actually affect the world. So late in development, we actually had to reconsider the whole architecture and end up coming up with a solution that actually solved a lot of problems for us, which is more of a hybrid solution where it's a peer-to-peer network instead of a client-server network. So in this scenario, both the client and the server had control over a lot of what they, like spawning of AI, the scripting, the processing, and they kept each other up to date on what was going on and kept each other in sync. So that actually allowed a limited amount of parallel processing that allowed us to increase the AI that were being spawned in the entire world, because the ownership of each of all the AI was actually split up between the two machines, thus increasing the power of what we could do and allowing some of the benefits of allowing more enemies to be spawned to help balancing and that sort of thing. So just a quick high-level view of that. Like I said, there are some downsides to that. We had to actually re-engineer a lot of our systems to support the packets that had the way the packets were being sent. And again, that hampered us on design side in our iteration of gameplay. But it was well worth it. We were able to get that limited parallel processing. We were able to get more AI in the game. And actually some more features that we wanted earlier became possible, but we didn't put them in the game. One of those, if you guys are familiar with Saints Row 2, you know you can customize cars. And one of the things that players want to do, of course, is trade cars, right? They want to make one car and then want to give it to their friend. They want to give it over. We weren't able to do that in the previous iteration of our server technology because the ownership of that object was always in the hands of the person that originated it, right? So even though that became possible, we just didn't have time to go ahead and put that in the game. Maybe in the future, who knows? What did we learn? For programming, make sure that when your programmers are evaluating systems, they are keeping this in mind. Architect your game to support co-op. Make sure that when you're doing iteration, you're thinking of co-op, making sure that all those considerations are being met. And of course, enormous amounts of bugs are going to come out of a co-op system because the complexity added is so much higher. QA. 37% of bugs were very specific to co-op. That's not to say that we weren't. That was the only limit on the co-op bugs, but those are specific co-op bugs. And talk to production early on and say, guys, we're going to need 2 people to test co-op exclusively. We actually got in a situation early on where we started to test our co-op feature, and we only had 1 guy. So as you can see, that can cause problems. You get a lot of bugs that start out when the server is at the end of the mission and the client is at the beginning. So sounds obvious, but just wanted to let you know. From design side, like, we were really ambitious, right? We wanted to do a lot, and we pushed a lot of features in the game. And I think I'm proud of what we did. I think we did a great job, and people really responded great to the content we provided. But if I were to do this again, I would make a lot of cuts earlier on. I would make sure that we preserve the core of our game and provide compelling experiences to the player, but do it earlier. Do your cutting earlier. Do your planning earlier. And just be aware of these problems that I've told you, and make sure stability is there before you start putting more features into the game. And when you're doing the drop in, drop out, you're going to have to solve the continuity problem of your story. I mean, if you don't care about that, if you think it's fine for players to look ahead, which we did, we didn't think that was a big problem because we really wanted players to engage in the co-op mode. But if you're really invested in your story and the experience of that story, you're going to have to solve that problem. And I don't know if I can beat this into people's heads enough. Untethered and open world creates a lot of problems. But it also affords the greatest opportunities for your players to experience an open world gameplay in a co-op session that is uninhibited and allows them to experience all the systems that you provide to them at the fullest and really explore that space that you provided in a way that they'll be very excited about. Despite all that, of the problems, I do think it was well worth it. Our achievement data actually says that people who played co-op played through more of our game, which it was actually surprising to me, but it was awesome. We locked some reviewers in a room together for 24 hours and made them play our game. Supplied them with all kinds of stuff, but anyways, and they really liked it. So I would like that too. I mean, it's something that your players and the press are going to really like, and I think it's just expected these days to have some sort of online component. And this sounds like really, but design all your systems, everything with co-op in mind. Make sure when you're reviewing documents or reviewing your systems, make sure that you're thinking about co-op. It's very easy to, especially in a game where you're providing both a single player and a co-op experience, to forget about the co-op part of it because it's not the main part of your game, right? But it is. It's an important part, and always think of it. Always make sure that you're keeping that in the back of your head. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I hope you learned something. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to come to the mic, or I'll be hanging around as well. Can you turn the mic on for the questions?
Do you have any plans for adding in larger sets of co-op, like 4 players or 8 players? I can imagine that would be even more complexity issues.
I can't actually speak to that, like any future plans as far as like what we're going to put in our future products, but it's something we definitely thought about.
Do you have any issues with changing the difficulty in the parallel processing if either the client or the host dropped mid-mission?
Well, we actually use the difficulty setting of the server. So we solved that problem by just locking it at whatever the server was. Had we done that, had we made each player a separate difficulty level, we definitely would have had those problems.
I mean, if the server was the one who dropped, would like half the AI disappear, or how did that work?
We actually, one thing we did very well was really gracefully end sessions. So what we would do is when the server was disconnecting, we would actually kind of we gray out the screens and say waiting for the client, waiting for the server, and then give it like a little time to reconnect, and then we drop the session completely.
Thank you.
No. Oh, I forgot. They asked me to make sure you guys put 5s on all your feedback forms, or actually just fill them out. That's my own little plea, but anyways.
Do you know how many of your overall player base actually played co-op?
How much of our co-op?
Like how much of your online player base, like anybody that was
According to our data, like it pretty much follows the actual percent of our player base that played co-op was very similar to the actual overall percentage of people who had Xbox Live accounts or PS3 accounts. It tended to be on the lower side, so between 40%.
All right, thanks.
What if I have a certain faction and then I join my friend's game who has a different faction? How did you resolve that?
Sorry?
If I have a faction with my saved game with my character and then I join someone else's game, or did the factions not work that way?
Well, the players weren't the players were in the same faction. I mean, they were they're all the saints, right? So the players would join. One player would join, and they would basically be the homie of the other player. They had their own. They could access their own crib and their own weapons and everything. But whenever the player joined the server, they were the master, basically.
I see. And did you preserve multiple save games so that you could go back into your own crib then, and someone else could join your world?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if I wanted to play with my friend, like I could join you, play with you in your progression, and then we could disconnect, and then you could join me and play in my world and with my progression.
Could you explain what happens to the client when he skips missions 3 through 6 again and then goes back to play single player? Okay, so he wanted me to explain the progression scenario again. So basically what happens, like the players, one player joins another player who's played 6 of the 8 missions in a set, right? They've completed the first 2 missions. So what they would do is they come in with, like say you've got the first 6 missions. I join you, I complete mission 7 and 8. Then I go back to my save game, right? Missions 7 and 8 are marked as done. But then when I proceed and I get to mission 5, I actually have to play through that mission, as well as mission 6 and 7. Or actually missions 5 and 6. As you noticed, my slide was numbered wrong. But so when you hit the mission that you've already played before, with the way we handle it is we prompt the player, would you like to play this mission again, or would you like to see the cutscene? So we would play the cutscene if they said that we want to play the mission again, then we would allow the player to just go ahead and play the mission, see the cutscene, everything, have the full experience of the mission. If they chose not to, then they would just see the cutscene and have that mission marked as done. And so they would go and do that until they reached the end of their mission progression, and then they would get their achievement. So you wanted them to see the cutscene to at least understand the story in order?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even though they've kind of seen the spoiler, right? We wanted them to see the cutscene anyways.
Because they would have seen the cutscene as client in the co-op game.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course you can always skip through cutscenes. So so even if you chose like, no, I don't want to play the mission, you got the cutscene played for you. You still just skip through it if you're like, I just saw this 5 minutes ago or whatever. So.
Okay.
Cool.
You said in co-op you had this situation where to load balance both players would be controlling elements of the world rather than one controlling everything.
Yeah.
Did you have any issues where there was ever any ambiguity over who is controlling what object, and how did you solve those?
Well, I mean, to the players, it presented very seamlessly. I mean, all of that ownership issues were controlled by the code behind the scenes. There was when there's rapid change over ownership, there was still some oddities that you can create if you try. Basically, we handed over ownership of objects as the players were interacting with them. So if one, say you owned an NPC, and I started shooting it, it would change the ownership over to me. Whoever was damaging, there was a lot of complexity. I didn't actually program it, so that's the general designer.
I'm a programmer. That's why I asked.
So yes, there are some issues with that. The more of the interactions that happen, the more there's a chance that there'll be some oddity. But before there was a lot of oddity.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.